Feminism and social media are not to blame for what women are doing today. I am 58 years old, so from my own experiences I know that feminism, social media, divorce, and fathers not being in the home are all not to blame for any of the following. Women having a lot of sexual partners, women requiring men to be high earners or make a lot of money, children from a household where the father is not in the home are at a higher risk as an adult of going to prison, the divorce rate, the hookup culture, men asking women what do they have to offer or what do they bring to the table, why women cannot find a good man, and why men cannot find a good woman. I will prove this by providing examples from my own and others' personal experiences. I try to show some kind of interesting places in my videos because I think that people would prefer not just to see someone talking. This place is the Chicago River. First, I will start with some data because many interpret data wrong. Many add information that the data does not state. My undergraduate degree is in math and statistics. There are about 2 million people, male and female, in the United States who are currently in prison or jail. Plus, there are about 15 million women who are single mothers in the United States. Thus, if all the single mothers only have one child, then at the most, one can only say that about 13% of children raised by single mothers, in a household with no father, might one day go to prison. Therefore, since the majority of children that are raised by single mothers, or in a household with no father are not in prison, or does not go to prison, one cannot say that a child being raised in a household with no father is a factor that could result in the child going to prison. The only thing that one can say is that the people in prison have in common is that they were raised in a household with no father. The data does not say that being raised in a household with no father could result in a child going to prison or jail. I know a lot of people that were raised with no father in the house, and they became great adults. The ones that did not become great adults all had mothers that were abusive or neglectful in some kind of way. Thus, I would hypothesize that children raised in a household with no father does not indicate that the child will have problems when they become adults. Being raised in a household where the mother is abusive or neglectful is the real indicator that the child will have problems when he becomes an adult. Plus, because the mother is an abusive person is why there is no father in the house. Back in the 80s, I took a marriage and family class in college, at a university, and the divorce rate was not truly high. It was not truly over 60%. What made the divorce rate high was the same people getting a divorce over and over again. Since the divorce rate has not really changed over the decades, means that this trend is probably the same and will always be the same. The true divorce rate is about 40%. From the same class, the researchers discovered that when they compared the day people got married to the date their first child was born, in the United States and England, over 60% of these couples had their first child within 6 months from the day of their wedding. Thus, for the past 200 years, most women in the United States and England were pregnant before they got married. In the 50s, after the Communist Party took over China, the Communist Party made divorce legal. There were now so many women that wanted a divorce that it caused China's courts to become backed up for 2 years. You cannot blame feminism for the divorce rate. In addition, all of my aunts are now in their 70s and 80s. Some of my aunt's friends told me that one of the reasons why they got divorced was because they listened to their girlfriends, or what some call the sisterhood, telling them they can do better. Plus, all of these women, after their divorce, were looking for high-value men. They all wanted to trade up, and find a man that was better than their ex-husband. Better looking and earned more money. This was taking place in the 70s and the 80s, thus, before there was modern feminism. None of them were able to trade up, and the women, the sisterhood who told these women that they can do better, also never found a high-value man. The bad part is that these older women are telling today's young women to do the same things they did. In the 80s, some of my female friends told me that some of their female friends' mothers were telling their daughters to marry a high-value man. Plus, many mothers today are still giving their daughters the same advice. In addition, in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, many single women and single mothers were saying that they did not need a man. In the 90s, I dated a single mother named Michelle, who told me that she did not mind dying alone like their mother and aunts. Plus, 4 of my uncles died in the late 90s, and they all were in their 70s or 80s. They decided not to get married and just went from woman to woman. There were a lot of single mothers in the 1960s and the 1970s. Back in the 50s, the 60s and the 70s, if you were a poor white or black teenager, there was no way that you could hide the birth of your child, and you could not get an abortion. So you and your family just had to deal with it. Plus, in the 50s and the 60s, there were secretarial pools. There were a lot of girls that graduated high school, and one of the only decent jobs they could get was as a secretary. Thus, you had a lot of young single women in the workplace. As the saying goes from the 1950s, Friday nights are for the girlfriend, and Saturday nights are for the wife. Since my uncles were all in the army at one time, I got cousins who I never met in Hawaii, Kentucky, Idaho, and other places. Plus, I might have cousins in Korea and Vietnam. One of my uncles told me that Asian women are not submissive. They just do it differently than American women. My aunt went to high school in the 1960s, and she told me that she learned more about different kinds of knocking it down, or different kinds of sexual acts from the white girls. So where did the white girls learn it? Plus, sex education classes never talked about the different kinds of acts or positions. People forget that during World War II, the military gave its soldiers condoms because the military knew the men would need them. Plus, after they got back to America, many soldiers said that the women in Europe were more open when it came to intimate relations. How would you know this if you were not attempting to use the condoms before you left? We are men. We do not change. We are the same all over the world. We are always saying stuff to get into a girl's pants. Therefore, all the men on the dating websites people are calling simps are just practicing their game. In the 70s, I met an old white man, and he told us stories about his life growing up. He said that now we have telephones in our homes and girly magazines on the streets. He said that he remembers when his town got its first telephone. It was a payphone, and it was located on the edge of town. He also said that the operator had a pretty voice. It was hard, but they managed. Back in the year 2004, I met a man named Wayne, who was over 70 years old, and who is white. In the 1950s, when Wayne was 20 years old, he was married. One day after work, Wayne and two of his friends went from Ohio to Florida for spring break, and had a good time. None of the men told their wives until they got back to Ohio. All of them are divorced. The point is that spring break was taking place back in the 1950s. Plus, people forget that birth control or the pill became public in the late 1950s. Plus, do not forget about the hippies and free love of the 1960s. In the 70s, HIV or AIDS spread around the world quickly, and came to the United States in the year 1976 because people were having a lot of relations. This means that many women in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s were doing the same stuff women are doing today. Back then, people just hid it more and did not talk about it as much. Social media has just made it easier and acceptable. Thus, none of it is because of the feminist movement. All of this means that women are using feminism to justify what they have been doing for the past 50 years. Thus, feminism is not to blame for anything women are doing today. Plus, women have always pursued the Tyrones, the Chads or bad boys. For my foreign viewers, Chad or Tyrone is a category of men who are good looking and have money. In the 70s and the 80s, because there were more males in college compared to females, the girls had control. This also means that it does not matter if there is, or is not, an 80-20 rule for dating apps. Women would be doing and acting the same way because this is the way it has always been. Back in the 1980s, when I was in college, I was at a party with my friend, whose name was Mark. Mark is white. There was a girl named Beth who was also white. Beth told us that she would only date a man that has a car, a motorcycle, his own apartment, and she mentioned a few other requirements. Me, Mark, and a few other men asked Beth the following question. If the man has to have all of those things, then what do you offer? What do you bring to the table? Thus, men have always been asking this question to women. In the 80s, when I was in college, I took more than a few girls on dates, and after the date, they told me they had boyfriends. However, when they all were in their last 2 years of college, they all wanted to get with me. Women do not date down, and now these women had to compete with all the new girls just starting college. Thus, these girls, now women, did not have as many men chasing or wanting to date them. Many of the girls I dated in college told me that they were going to date other men, but still wanted me as the primary man. What surprised me was when they got upset when they discovered that I also was dating other women. They got burned by their own rules. In the 80s, when I was an undergrad in college at a university, I had a friend named Mark. My friend Mark was renting an apartment with 3 girls. One day I was waiting for Mark, and I noticed that there were 5 people in Mark's roommate's bedroom talking. Mark's roommate was named Karen. So I joined the conversation. Karen had her closet door open. Karen had the master bedroom, so it was not a small closet. Half of her closet had sweatshirts that covered the whole floor, went all the way to the top shelf, and then to the ceiling. I asked Karen why did she have so many sweatshirts. She answered by saying,
"You know, when you sleep over at a guy's house, you need something to wear home in the morning."
For all of her years in college, at a university, Karen never had a boyfriend for more than a week. Thus, the hookup culture was big back in the 80s. After you graduated college, things changed. Women do not date down, but most men do not care what kind of education or job a woman has. Thus, the man might be highly educated, but we will date and marry the secretary, the waitress, the barmaid, the stripper, or the single mother. Because of this, and because women do not date down, there were now a lot more females compared to males. Plus, after a few years of being out of college, the girls get hit by reality. Particularly when daddy stopped paying all the bills. After I graduated from college, I had a few of the girls I dated in college calling me wanting to be in a relationship. My brother graduated college in the 70s, and I graduated college in the 80s, and just like today, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s were a big hookup culture. The internet just makes it more convenient. Back then, all the girls that did not get picked by a Tyrone or a Chad on Friday or Saturday, would be at a bar on Sunday, all lonely. This is when the average guy could score. For my foreign viewers, Chad or Tyrone is a category of men who are good looking and have money. In 1990, I had a friend named Norman, who is black, and when he was 32 years old, he was finally making a good living. This allowed him to dress better than what he dressed in college, drive a nice car, and purchase a house. Back in the 80s and 90s, it was difficult to purchase a home because the interest rate for a mortgage was 10%. The girls who would not give Norman the time of day in college were using their own money to fly in from other states just to spend time with him. In 1984, when my friend named Jimmy was 28 years old, who is white, purchased a Porsche, Jimmy said the following to me.
"Todd, they are not looking at us, they are looking at the car. When they do you, they are really doing the car, and you are just there for the ride."
In 1993, I visited my brother in Seattle and we were driving around in a Jaguar, and he told me the same thing. I got hundreds of stories like this from men who are black, white, Latino, and Asian. Thus, nothing has changed. Nothing is different today compared to what it was back then. Now, all the girls would meet a Norman or a Jimmy one weekend, and would sleep with him the next weekend. Afterward, Jimmy or Norman would never call. So the girl would find another Jimmy or Norman, and start the cycle all over again. As I said earlier, back in the 80s and the 90s, all the girls that did not get picked by a Tyrone or a Chad on Friday or Saturday, would be at a bar on Sunday, all lonely. This is when the average guy could score. There are only 52 weeks in a year, and if you subtract the holidays, then this gives you 15 to 20 guys these women have had sexual relations within 1 year. In fact, this one girl I was dating told my friend, that if Todd gives me a commitment, I will stop seeing other men. Thus, back in the 70s, the 80s and the 90s, many women in their 20s were cycling through men. Jimmy or Norman would never call because they knew that if they did not have the car they were driving, none of these girls would give them the time of day. These are usually the kind of women that cycled through men in their 20s. So now it is Jimmy or Norman's turn to cycle through women. Subsequently, because of resentment, Jimmy or Norman are doing the same things that were done to them when they were in their 20s. This is one of the reasons why many women cannot find a good man and why many men cannot find a good woman. There is a saying that says that the nice guy gets the girl in the end. However, what they forgot to tell you is that the nice guy might get the girl in the end, but we figured out what we are getting, and we do not want it. Thank you for watching. Please click the like button, subscribe, leave a comment, and share this video. For all my foreign viewers, most translation software is not 100% accurate. So, sorry about any mistakes. For a free copy of my music, go to my website. Remember, my music is only background music. Right now, my music is free, but if I have to start paying for extra services, then I might have to set a price for a download. If you want to know how to create your own music, then go to my other YouTube channel and look for the word Garageband. Creating your own music is easy. I did it and I cannot play a musical instrument. If you want to know how to translate a video into other languages, then go to my other YouTube channel and look for the word translate. The links are in the description below.